Oh, what do you guys think happened? It's obvious I messed up the recording. Um, as you can see, we got to about here before I realized that I wasn't recording my voice. You know? So, let's start over! Alright. Okay, we're doing a Koan sound style bass. It's a Reese bass. It's got lots of movement. It's a two-step process. Step one is creating the bass synth patch, and then we take that synth patch and we resample it, or just plug the audio into a sampler to give it the sampled feel, which allows us to manipulate the sound in ways that you can't because it's audio and it just behaves differently inside of a sampler, and it sounds a little bit different too. It sounds like it's in a sampler. It's a desired thing that you do creatively. You choose to do it. Anyway, let's not waste any time because there's just no time to waste. Okay. So first, let's listen to the synth patch that I created before it was plugged into the sampler. It might be a little loud, I honestly have no idea, so just prepare yourself. So, as you can hear, this is a square-based Reese patch with some distortion and lots of filter movement. I've got some extra filters in here that you can turn on at your own discretion if you want to give it even more movement. So you technically could just throw this into your song the way it sounds right there. However, if you plug it into a sampler, it will start to behave just like all of your favorite D&B gods use it, in the way that if you play it higher or lower on the keyboard, the sample will either speed up or slow down, which doesn't just sound cool, but it also makes the bass more dynamic across time and just, I don't know, maybe more musical sounding is the right adjective. But anyway, this is what it sounds like in a sampler. If you notice, I'm going to play with the pitch wheel, and as we go up, it's going to speed up, and as we go down, it's going to slow down. And this is something that Koan Sound does all the time with all of their basses. And we're using the NN19 here because later you can't do this in the NNXT, but in the NN19 we can play with the sample start time, which just allows for more variation with the sound. So this is what the sound sounds like in the sampler. So yeah. So pretty cool sounding. Once you get through this tutorial, you can pretty much do this with any bass patch. I mean, once we have this basic chain set up, not to promote laziness or anything like that, but once you have this basic chain set up, I mean, you just play with a couple parameters in your Thor, and you can have just a whole bunch of different variations of this right off the bat for some sweet tunage. So let's not waste any time. Let's hop right into this. Let's load in a Thor. Let's expand the programmer because, you know, we don't use presets in this neck of the woods. Turn on mono retrig. We're making a bass. Put the range up to 12 so we can do some pitch bending if we want to. And let's turn off our filter and start with our oscillators, because oscillators is where the whole world starts. So let's load in a wavetable oscillator. Wavetable oscillators, really cool thing to use for you know, EDM productions in general. You know, EDM. Who likes that term? Not me. But yeah, wavetable oscillator, it's kind of like a mini sample player. For example, basically in the basic analog patch, which we're going to be using right now because we're going for a square wave, we have this position knob, and it lets us slide between cross-faded parts of the sample in a way. So all the way down here, we have a sine wave. We go up, it turns into a triangle, to a square, to a saw. So if we put it to about 85, we have like a square saw-ish hybrid kind of deal. And that's exactly what we want, you know? We don't want just a regular square or saw. We want a square saw hybrid because that's a little bit more out of the ordinary, maybe. Who knows? Not me. But let's load into Oscillator 2 a multi-oscillator because we are doing a Reese-based sound here. We want it to be detuned and lots of movement. That's kind of Reese 101. Detuned, lots of movement. So let's jump this up to like 44. Let's put it on interval. If we put it on interval, it's going to give us a nice, clean, detuned sound. And let's put it to a square wave because we're rolling with a square-based Reese right now. So let's turn on 1 and 2 to be routed through filter 1, and that's just going to go right to our output after that. And for our filter, we are going to load in a comb filter. And the reason we're going to load in a comb filter is because a comb filter is it doesn't kind of. What it does is it creates a very short delay between the original. It plays the original with a very short delay behind it, and the resonance adjusts the feedback of that delay. So what happens when you have any sound in unison, is phasing happens because no two anything is the same ever. But when two things are very close, you get phasing. And phasing creates dynamics over time, both in frequency content and amplitude. So the comb filter is great for this because it creates like a bunch of little notches across the frequency spectrum. And if we modulate the frequency cutoff of a comb filter, we're going to get just tons of frequency movement, which is exactly what we want for this kind of bass, because when the bass is also the lead, like it is in this kind of music, you want it to be interesting, so we want to generate a lot of movement. So let's lower the sustain and release on the filter envelope, because we're going to hit the invert button here, and we're going to jack this up to 56, the filter envelope amount knob, this knob right here. And what this knob does is it dictates how much the filter envelope is going to adjust the frequency cutoff. It's going to be moving this slider around even though we won't actually be seeing that happen in real time. That's what's happening. So let's turn the attack up to about 1 second and the decay down to about 3 seconds. Let's turn the frequency cutoff to 3.6 kilohertz, and that's pretty much all we got to do. Now when we strike the key, the filter envelope will engage and move the frequency according to the parameters that we just set. So although that's going to be great, that's going to create a lot of movement, it's only going to work in a one-shot scenario. So as you will hear, every time I strike the key, it's going to kind of start over again. So let's go to Combinator 3, which is our new patch, and test that out. You hear that's like there's like a wow, wow. That's the filter envelope doing its thing. If I let it play out a little more, it'll evolve over time. Let's actually even look at it in the frequency analyzer in Ableton Live. And if you look up here about 1 kilohertz and above, you'll notice across time we're going to see the notch filters moving across the high frequencies that are going to be creating some of our movement for us. You see that? Perfect. Perfect, that's exactly what we want. We also need to adjust our amp envelope because this is, you know, an electronic bass patch in the forefront of our music. We want it to not die over time. So we want it to be loud and proud in our face. So now that we got all that settled, like I said, the filter envelope is only going to be like a one-shot deal. So to generate a little more subtle movement over time, we're going to route in the mod matrix LFO1 to filter 1 frequency by the amount of 35, a nice moderate amount, not too much, not too little, it's perfect. We're going to bring the rate down to 0.35 hertz because that's super duper slow, and that's going to generate lots of subtle movement over time. That way, every time we strike the key, it's going to be a little bit different. Just ever so slightly, but it is a little bit different. And the ear knows even if your brain doesn't. So the last and final thing we're going to do with Thor right now is turn the chorus on. This is an optional step, but there's lots of ways to add stereo width in Reason. Thor is at the end of the day mostly a monophonic synthesizer. It's not really outputting a stereo image right now. So to add some stereo width to our sound, if we want it to be real big, we can flip the chorus on. Leave every parameter as it is except the dry wet, turn that up all the way so we're only getting the wide stereo image. This is going to add even more movement to our sound because it's adding like a unison effect. So that, with all the other unison stuff we have going on, is going to give us a lot of movement right off the bat. So, after all that is done, we got to create our first D filter. So as you've noticed by now, I forgot to mention at the start of the video, we're using some rack extensions here, 3 to be exact, and the reason I'm using them as opposed to anything else is I'm about to give you a walkthrough of the D filter, and it's going to be pretty obvious why I'm using it as opposed to anything else. But basically they just do what I want better. The whole thing about rack extensions, in my opinion, is that they don't, 90% of the time, they don't replace or do anything that Reason can't do on its own, but a lot of the times they make things easier, and as with the case with the D filter, it actually adds functionality that isn't anywhere else in the software. So, here's a quick run through of the D filter and why we're going to use it here. Basically, the D filter is like an all-purpose, anything you want it to be filter minus comb and formant. Because we have control over the low frequency and high frequency cutoff, or this dual knob which moves them both together at the same time. So as you can see in this nice little graphic up here, if I move the dual knob to the left, it acts as a low pass filter. Everything below the cutoff comes through, everything above it is gone. And if I move it to the right, it's a high pass filter. Swing. But if I move the low frequency and the high frequency closer to each other on band pass mode, it becomes a band pass filter. And I can adjust the band width of the filter. I can make it literally that small if I wanted to. And that's something that you can't do anywhere else in Reason. I don't have control over a bandpass filter like this anywhere else in Reason, and in this style of sound design or music, you want lots of control over your filter because that's going to really generate your sound and make it unique and make it have all that movement. Filtering is going to give it all the movement that makes the sound interesting to the ears. So the more control over the filters, the better the sound, and you know, it's just like, you know what I mean? Also, we can run the D filter in band stop mode, which is what we're going to be doing here, because in band stop mode, if we move the low frequency and high frequency closer to each other, we're creating a notch filter here. Basically, this area of the frequency spectrum is getting cut out and this stuff is coming in, so that's a notch filter. And we have these filters in Thor. We have a notch and a band pass. But they aren't anywhere near as flexible as the D filter. So yeah, let's get this D filter going. So like I said, we want it in band stop mode. We want to bring the low frequency to about there and the high frequency to about where it is right there, and the dual leave it in the middle because we're going to modulate the position of the dual knob and the low and high frequency knobs with another rack extension created by the grand old propeller heads themselves, called Pulsar, if I can find it. Where is it? I wish you guys could like shout out. There it is. Oh, it's in utilities for sure, right? Yeah. There it is. All right, Pulsar. Pulsar is just an LFO module. We could, if we wanted to, route an LFO from Thor into the D filter, but we're going to use Pulsar here because, you know, it's fun to use new and exciting things. So let's leave the tempo sync on Pulsar and put it to quarter notes, 1/4. Leave the level where it is and turn the lag all the way up. It's going to smoothen it out, maybe round it out a little bit. That's how I like to think about it. Let's turn LFO2 on and bring the rate down to about 0.80, I think. 0.84 is good. Bring the level up to about here, so it's pointing up to 2, and bring the lag all the way up again. And switch LFO2 to a sine wave so that it's, you know, softer, a little more dramatic. Yeah, and that's all we're going to do with Pulsar, except now we're going to do the most exciting, amazing thing that we can do in Reason and hit the tab key. And boom, here we are. So we're going to take the CV out of the first LFO module and plug it into the dual filter input. And look at that. Movement. And then we're going to take the LFO2 output and put it into the low frequency cutoff. So now the shenanigans are happening on the filter right now. So this is what our sound sounds like right now. Just a lot of filter movement out of nowhere. It's crazy. It's honestly, it might even be too much, but we're gonna let it happen. So this next D filter is optional. Basically, it's just the same kind of deal. Just creating some more movement. We're going to leave it off for now. And the next thing we're going to do, very popular in this style of sound design and music, is we're going to do some band splitting and process bands separately from one another. This is going to, well, yeah. This is what this is going to do is just allow us to take the mid section and apply one type of distortion, take the high section, apply a different kind of distortion, and leave the lows alone so we get some nice clean lows, because distorted lows, they just don't sound so good in the amount that we're going to be applying to the rest of the sound here. So we want to isolate those from everywhere else. So let's, oh, the routing was done automatically for us. Thank you very much, Reason. We have the audio out of the D filter going into the input of the Yoko band splitter. Very clever name, very, very funny. Okay, so on the Yoko band splitter, we're going to turn the slope to 12 so we get some blending between our bands. And our bands are going to be set as follows. Our low-mid cutoff is going to be at 203 Hertz. But for some reason we can only get to 206 right now. And our high is going to be at 7162. So now holding the shift key, let's create two screams. One for the mids, one for the high. Our first scream unit is going to be on overdrive with parameter 1 all the way to the right and parameter 2 all the way to the left. And our second scream unit is going to be on tape, same exact thing. Our first scream unit is going to have its body turned on, resonance down, scale down, auto down, and type switch to B. And the other one's going to have the body on with all the same parameters except type on A. Now we have to route these up, but just for the sake of you getting these parameters right, basically these master section knobs have been adjusted so that even though we are adding distortion, the volume level of the bands has not changed. We don't want that to change because it's going to throw our mix off. We want this sound to be pure. A good source makes for a happy mix at the end of the day, so if your source is good, then it's going to be easy to throw into your mix as opposed to if we have these bands that are all over the place and our sound has no because all sounds, unless they're specifically sound designed in one way or another, the fundamental frequencies are much louder than all the overtones, partials, and harmonics. So we want to retain that balance in our sound. So we're adjusting the master faders on the bands to maintain that original frequency spectrum layout. So on the first unit, let's put our master to 75. And on the second one, let's bring our master all the way down to 42. And that'll retain the original frequency distribution of the sound in the first place. So let's hit the tab key and route this up. Basically, the Yoko band splitter has these really convenient low, mid, and high outputs. So we can take the mid output, effect process it through the first scream, take the output of that scream and throw it back in to the Yoko, so that after we do this with the highs also, real quick, hit the K to hide these cables, we can just take the sum output and throw it into our next part of the effects chain, as opposed to taking the outputs of these individually and throwing them into a mixer, etc., etc. So the next part of the effects chain is really just this equalizer, because we're not going to do these optional defilters to start. So let's throw an EQ in here. Let's route this up manually. And all we're doing with this EQ right here is cutting 30 Hertz, which is something that I do pretty much on everything, unless you really want something below 30 Hertz. But high passing 30 Hertz everywhere is just going to save you a little bit of headroom and clean up some mix artifacts that you might not even be able to hear, but will be throwing off your mix on some level. So let's just move one of these parametric EQ sliders to about 600, right? Bring the gain down 7.1, and the Q to about 3.3 to make it nice and wide. And this is just going to scoop a little mid-range out. This is also optional. The reason I scooped this out in the first place was just because I was modeling it after an actual cone sound bass. So they probably did some EQing on their track to make it work with the rest of their elements. However, it's generally a bad idea to be EQing your sound even before you throw it into a mix, because a mix is the sum of its parts, not really how one thing sounds on its own, So this is only because it was modeled directly after a specific cone sound song, and I was modeling that bass's exact frequency curve. It's been a really long time, so I don't remember what that was, but this is a mid-scoop, which will probably clean up your sound a little bit, but this is also optional. So this is one final distortion unit. We're going to take the sum output and throw it into this final scream. Just for a little bit more crunchiness, we're going to switch it to tape. Throw it down like that. Nothing else. Leave it alone. So here's what the final patch will sound like before we resample it. So now we're going to load up a brand new combinator, and it's just a combinator because I like to throw everything inside of combinators. And inside of this combinator, we are going to throw in an NN19 digital sampler. Now, a neat little routing trick, which I have in all of my tracks whenever I'm producing, is I create a spider audio right below my master section, take the master output of the master section, throw it into a spider audio right below it, and band split it to throw it back into the main audio in-out of Reason right here, and then I take another one and put it into the sampling input, so that way I can sample anything that's coming out of the master section inside of Reason. It's kind of like a one-button all kind of deal. So all I have to do now to get this Thor into this NN19 is hit this sample button. Now we're recording the master output, and I'll go back to my Combinator 3, which is where the Thor is coming from, and hit the C. So now I got a really nice big chunk of that sound in here, and just like anywhere in Reason, all I have to do to edit this bad boy is go into Edit Sample, crop it again, crop it again, and now we're just going to take a nice chunk of this and hit Set Loop Crossfade. Let's see if it crosses nicely. And it does. Now we have this in our sampler. And there's only one last thing to do, besides switching this range up to 24 so we can have all those crazy movements, is plug in another pulsar LFO so that we can modulate this sample start. Because if we go to our NN19 patch now, so if we go to our NN19 patch now, you'll see every time, because we're playing back a sample, every time I hit the key, it's going to sound exactly the same. But if I adjust the sample start, we're going to go to a new place in the waveform. And this is a great way to, choose certain bits that you like, bounce them to audio, and, arrange them around your song. This is how all the guys, they're not plugging necessarily their sound into a sampler, but I mean they're bouncing their basses to audio and then chopping them up and moving them all over the place so that it kind of creates like a hook, like a vocal hook almost, because you're hearing the same sounds in repetition. It makes it groovy, it makes it dancey like that. So if we want to do that automatically to create some variation for us, if we flip the NNXT around, we'll see that there isn't a CV input spot for the sample start. So how do we get around that? That's just like, that's not fair, I want to modulate that thing. So I hit Show Programmer on the Combinator and route my CV output into the CV1 input of the Combinator. You see, kids, the Combinator is a shortcut. Anything that you can't modulate with a CV input on the device, plug that into a Combinator, and all of your wildest dreams come true. So inside the Combinator's programmer, we hit the NN19. We change our source to CV input 1. We make our target the, let's find it on here. Performance, oscillator sample start. And now it's wiggling. So let's make it wiggle a lot more. Let's make it wiggle slower. Wiggle like that, maybe? Let's see what that sounds like. Maybe a little faster. 60 something. So now if we have it down low and we lift the pitch, and that's your Koan sound Reese right there. And if you ever wanted to go play around with some of the parameters, mess around with some stuff, make the timbre of the sound a little different, you just go back to your patch up here, play with some stuff, and then throw it back into the sampler, and you're good to go. See what else we can do. Yeah, check the description down below to download the patch, and like us on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube. More tutorials on the way.